definitely was a misfit growing up. Did not relate to people well at all. I was intellectually developed, but not in any other realm. I was called the brain by the kids in class. I got all A's. I was considered very bright, but, and I was an intelligent person. I was an intense person. You could call me a passionate person, but I was socially inept, socially very awkward. I did not know how to talk to people, including the other kids in school. I was shy, and athletically, I was hopeless. I would be the last person picked for any team, and I had no skill in any sport. And of course, that makes a big difference when you're growing up. If you're one of these types that doesn't relate, is no good at parties, and can't play sports, you are just not part of the group. And I felt very alienated. Let me make clear that I didn't criticize them. I criticized myself. I felt that the social and athletic skills were things that I ought to have, but for some reason I didn't. There was a deficiency, a defect in me. I was very self-critical, very self-doubtful, and yet at the same time, I never could bring myself to try to learn a sport or acquire this social skill. I felt strongly that's not for me, but I didn't know why. I didn't know what it was about me that would make that not for me, and why I was such a misfit, so alienated. My father was a dedicated surgeon. From everything I could tell, he was a brilliant surgeon, a brilliant doctor. He worked excruciating hours. He operated surgically 5 hours each morning on weekdays. He saw patients in his office from 2 to 6 in the afternoon. He answered the telephone in the evenings with medical emergencies. He spent the weekend studying medical journals. And this was a man consumed by a passion for his career. And I picked that up very early. I found it very admirable. And he was, to that extent, a hero of mine. That has to be modified by the fact that he was a different person in his office than he was at home. In his office, he was calm. He was in control. He was rational. If you had an illness, you would turn yourself over to him without a question. He just came across as a wonderful doctor and a wonderful person. His patients worshipped him, legions of them. When he came home, he was just a different person, erratic, neurotic, very super sensitive, a bad temper. He wasn't at all averse to striking me, to hitting me, whipping me with a belt. And very often, to show you how erratic he was, after he would do that, he felt guilty that he had let himself go like that, and he would suddenly become extravagantly generous. And it was a chaotic environment to grow up in. I remember one time he was furious. I don't remember if he hit me that time or he was angry and cursed me out. And 10 minutes later, he gave me, and this is in the late 30s, early 40s. I was just a kid, and I was in Winnipeg. It was nighttime, it was dark, it was snowing, and he gave me a $10 bill, which at that time, for a kid of my age, was a huge amount. And he said, go out and have a good time, and opened the door, and it was pitch black outside and snowing. And my mother said, dear, what are you doing? He says, he only lives once, let him enjoy himself. You never knew what he was going to do next. From extremes, all different extremes. He was a very, very hard man to live with. And my mother used to tell me that I had to display love to him when he came home, because he was used to being surrounded by worship from his patients, and that was the atmosphere we had to provide at home. And of course, I resented that. I did not want to be told that I had to love him. So even though I did admire him in many ways, he would take anything other than lavish affection as being a rejection of him. So we had a very stormy relationship. Now, my mother, she had been the leader of a dancing band. She was an accomplished pianist. And they toured Western Canada, this girls' band. But she gave up her career completely when she married my father, as was the custom, I guess, in those days. She effaced herself. Therefore, she was not intellectual. She was not a strong personality, so she did not have a great influence on me. She loved me, and I could feel her love, but she wasn't an important factor in my development, except in one way, and that is she played a great deal of Chopin and Rachmaninoff on the piano, and she played it excellently. It was always in the background at home, so I grew up absorbing that beautiful romantic music was part of growing up, and certainly became part of the legacy that she left me. My parents were Jewish, not religious. I was brought up to observe the minimal rites of Judaism, to go to Sunday school, have a bar mitzvah, but the very minimal, go to a synagogue on the high holidays, but they didn't take it seriously. I called it a fur coat religion as a kid, because they would go, for instance, on the Day of Atonement, which is supposedly the most holy day, and all these families would come to gather supposedly to confess their sins and their evil, and they would all be wearing fur coats, expensive fur coats, and flaunting them. And the whole meaning was gathering and showing each other how well off, how rich, how affluent they were. And I thought it was hypocrisy from the beginning. My parents' real attitude to religion, to Judaism, was not the belief in God, although they had the lip service to belief in God. It was really, that's part of the tribe. It's part of being within the collective of Judaism. And so when I ultimately became an atheist, they didn't bat an eye. Their attitude was, that's fine as long as you marry a Jewish atheist and not some other kind. Of course, I had to take piano lessons. My parents mandated that. And I had to take Hebrew lessons to prepare for my bar mitzvah. They mandated that. So there were certain things that filled up the time. But on my own, the thing I spent some time with is I had a mammoth collection of comic books. I was on that intellectual level. I had every Captain Marvel and Superman and Batman, and they were all organized. And that basically was what occupied me. This was pre-TV when I was growing up. I used to listen to the radio a lot, listen to the various serials, but I was pretty much of a loner. I mean, I had one really close friend in college named Izzy Asper. And I liked him, I admired him, we got on very well together. He was an extremely unconventional kid. He was more intellectual than the people around me. You'd have to say he was wild and crazy. He had ideas that nobody else did, for adventures, for things to do, and that really appealed to me. I remember, for instance, this would give you an example. One evening, up there in Winnipeg, there was nothing much to do, and he said, why don't we drive to the United States and see a movie? And this is 9 or 8 at night, and the United States is 50, 60 miles to the south, and it was just unheard of. And we actually did it. We crossed the border. I believe it was into some little town in the northern part of North Dakota, right near the border. We found a movie theater that was open, and it was playing Cyrano de Bergerac, the Jose Ferrer version, which we saw. I loved that movie, and it subsequently became my top favorite play, the Cyrano. And we came back, and it was just a typical Izzy type of adventure, so he made life always interesting, because it was like breaking out of the conventional world that I was brought up in and that was all around me. From very early on, my father confronted me with the dilemma that you have to make a choice in life between the moral and the practical, or the idealistic and the realistic. I was a very strong idealist. I didn't know what my ideals were at that age, but I knew only something is right and something is wrong, and when you find out what's right, that's what you have to do. I had a generalized idea. Justice, fairness, honesty, integrity, but they were very generalized according to just a kid's concept of it. And I felt on my own that my ideals did not fit into the world because I felt so alienated